Good morning all. Sorry, a slight delay in starting because a lot of people are struggling with the link. I see we've had hundreds of emails this morning with people asking for the link again. Just in case anybody asks you, it's on the website. Click on the link for webinar. And there's a section on the left hand side that says enter the event. That's literally all you need to do and you will end up where you are. So if there's anybody sitting beside you that's wondering how they get on it, that's how they get on it. So first of all, thank you for coming along. There's big numbers. There's been a lot of interest in this webinar today, which at one point, one side of me was a bit surprised because I thought things are sort of bedded in quite a bit. But equally, within our planning, we knew that there would be a kind of settling period, and then around about April, May, which is now obviously, people would start to actually look at what they've been doing and how they've been surviving so far and what they need to do next. So, without further ado, and rather hoping that you can actually hear everything I'm saying, we will, by hook or by crook, make the screen move on. These things are really complicated to do because when you're doing a live stream event, it's there's a delay in it. So I've got screens showing me what you're seeing, and of course what you're seeing isn't the same as what I'm seeing because of the delay. Hey ho, it is what it is. What we're going to talk about today is we're going to talk about the phased processes, the Customs Clearance Consortium and the network and what the Customs Clearance Consortium is. I want to talk about VAT accounting, duty, countries of origin, preferential duty and so on and so forth, RGR, IPR and OPR, the R in all cases standing for relief, which is always a good topic. So how do you reduce the amount of duty that may be due? We're going to look at the deferred entry scheme, which is this cross the border and do the entry later on process. Looking at CFSP and particularly EIDR, IDA, entry in declarants records. This may be a little bit of acronym land today, but we're going to try and keep to the minimum. We're going to look at data management, how you can get smooth data flows because customs clearance is all about data, really. There's a lot of skill and process behind that, but without the data, it's nothing. We're going to look at IPAFs and traces, or recently renamed IMSOC, IMSOC, because it encompasses more than just the sort of CHED-P, CHED-A and all that nowadays. We're going to touch on Northern Ireland and the process that takes place for GBNI and the supplementary declaration process. We're going to give you the opportunity to meet the experts, so spend a bit of time with our subject matter experts, free of charge. So we'll give you the links for that and how you can sort of log on to book a slot. We're also going to talk about trade stats, which is an interesting topic because we do it in two different ways because we think this has got more than one dimension. So we look at the trade stats first of all, and then we look at the freight and ferry stats because the movement of trucks are really the barometer on trade. When I worked at Dover before, if you saw trucks starting to slow down, you can be sure there was a recession on its way, and about 3 weeks later you get announced that there was a recession on its way. So trucks really are a really early indicator. If there's less trucks on the road, there's less trucks at the ports, then there's something to worry about. If we get time, and we should do because we schedule for 2 hours, I don't think we'll necessarily need 2 hours, but we need more than one. So if we book 2, we might be able to give you some back, and you can have that one on us. But if we do get time, we want to talk about Incoterms, and the dreaded DDP ex-works scenarios, and also what you do with DDP exports. We're not particularly today going to talk about transit, simply because it's a complicated subject in its own right. Transit is often seen as the solution to all evils, but it also creates its own problems in that once you raise a transit document, it has to close. So a transit starts at A, ends in B. If it doesn't end at B, you will pay the duty and VAT that should have been paid at B. So I worry sometimes that people don't take transit documents seriously enough. They issue them because it's a get out of jail card, and they don't realise the liabilities and consequences that are attached to that document. We literally receive about 100 letters a day on transits which have not yet correctly closed, and we are now starting to see the bills for the duty and VAT which has not been collected at destination. So don't think transit is just a way of getting to where you want to go and sort of removing the process. It isn't. It's a way of tying the two processes together. So we'll deal with that one probably in another webinar later on. Okay, without further ado, let's show you some scary pictures first of all. Well, actually only one scary picture. A lot of the processes that were designed pre-Brexit were with the fear of this picture in mind, in that it would just be a complete logjam. There was the fear that Kent would come to a grinding halt. This image, although whilst shocking, is actually at Manston Airport, and it's actually nothing to do with Brexit. It's to do with the COVID pressures when France started to initially ban vehicles entering France, and then there had to be a test process. But there were a few days where they were banned completely, and Manston is the result of that. You've got to remember, when you're dealing with 10,000 vehicles a day, which, let's just keep that in perspective, that's 5,000 in, 5,000 out. Then you can very quickly, if you put the thing on delay, you can very quickly have a queue of 10,000 vehicles wanting to get out. So that was the shocking picture that nobody wanted for Brexit. That gave rise to the Kent Access Permit, where you weren't allowed to drive into Kent unless Kent was clear, where you weren't allowed to drive into Kent unless your processes were already in place. So the fear was that, and this fear drove a lot of the sort of process planning, particularly from the UK side. I mean, the EU process planning is the EU process planning. It's standard. It's how do you deal with a third country. There's nothing special. It's just what it is. So the biggest worry, of course, when everyone was approaching Brexit D-Day, whenever that was going to be, because it kept moving, and that was also one of the issues, was that there was this wall of process coming at you, and you just didn't quite know what you were going to do. Very unfamiliar territory. Everybody was used to dealing with Europe in a very sort of free flow way, and suddenly there were going to be barriers everywhere, and nobody quite knew how to cope with them. Oh, one I remember, because I've just noticed it myself on my own slide, is in the top right hand corner. We were going to have a Q&A section, but slightly fearful of some odd comments, we've decided to take it offline, but it is live. So if you have any questions that you want addressed during this process or during this presentation, please email webinar@eori.uk. There's a couple of experts sitting on the back end of that, waiting to address any questions that you might have. They'll do their best to answer them in a live environment, but if not, they'll get back to you if there's a more technical explanation required. So back to the wall of processes. What everybody was worried about was that you've got GB-EU flows, EU-GB, got to go to Ireland, come from Ireland, got to go into Northern Ireland, got to come out of Northern Ireland. What's that look like? Everything seems to require an export declaration, seems to require a transit, because that's what I'm reading everywhere. There's a safety and security declaration required, and ultimately an import declaration. And everything seemed to have at least these barriers in place. What actually happened with the easements is only those were valid from day one. So GB to EU required an export. That's fine, because an export from GB into the EU, it's not our club, it's not our rules. Therefore, we've got to go by the EU's rules for dealing with traffic from a third country. So there was an export required. Transit may be required depending on where you're clearing. If you're not clearing at the first touch point, then you need a transit to get to the touch point where you are intended to clear. Safety and security declarations, import declarations are required. EU to GB literally required an export. That's it. That's all it required from day one. Still the same today, I must say, although there's still quite a few people doing additional documentation. But right now, EU GB pretty much requires an export. In all of this, I'm not going into the finer detail, for example, of military goods, CITES, things like that. I'm just going for the bulk standard sort of majority of the goods that cross the channel. So excuse me if I'm perhaps oversimplifying it, but oversimplifying it because the simple market is at least 85% of the market. Hence sorry, maybe oversimplifying certain flows, but on the whole, the majority is pretty simple anyway. GB to Ireland was an export, a safety and security declaration, an import, just like going into the EU, because Ireland is in the EU. Last time I looked, the only thing there was you didn't particularly require a transit document, because there aren't many inland clearance stations. That's changed a bit now as there are more inland, but still the transit is a rarity into Ireland, where it's quite normal into mainland Europe. Again, an export from IE into GB or EU into GB is just an export declaration from Ireland. You can do the import later, so nothing particularly to worry about. And Northern Ireland is Northern Ireland. It's a completely different process. There's no export from GB. There's only an import into the customs territory of the EU, which is working under UCC regulations. So it's leaving the UK customs territory, and GB to NI, there is no control. When you arrive in NI, you're entering the EU customs territory, which is under full UCC, and therefore there is control. NI GB, not so, nothing at all. So we started with that, and that was the fear, that was what everybody was worried about. But actually on day one, it was pretty straightforward. It didn't feel like it at the time, I must admit. But one of the only reasons it didn't feel like it at the time for us is that we were dealing with Ireland. So there were times when I looked at it and thought, why do we get involved with the Irish flows? Because they're very high speed, there's not much geography involved, so everything's moving, everything's on a fast turnaround. But now looking back, I'm glad we did, because we've learned an awful lot, and we're probably about 3 months ahead of the market from the pain we went through with the Irish experience. And I was going to say, and we're still going through, but we're not. It's much smoother nowadays. So why were those processes like they were? Well, first of all, there was a phased approach generally by the UK government. The first line one here is proving that there wasn't a phased approach, but that was for GB exports. Now, GB exports into an EU import, there was no phased approach into the EU import because, quite frankly, why should the EU make life easy to leave the EU? Also, in the absence of any sort of trade deals at the time, they can't treat the UK any differently from any other third country, otherwise they'd be in breach of WTO rules, and they're certainly not going to do that to aid Brexit. So certainly from day one, there was an easement. There was no easement into the EU. There was still, and is still, an easement for the exit from GB, because if you have an export declaration, then you're fulfilling the correct process. If you don't have one, you're not actually going to get stopped anywhere, because right now, if you raise an export declaration to ship out of Dover, for example, putting transit to one side again for a minute, but if you raise an export declaration to ship out of Dover, that creates an MRN, a movement reference number. There's nowhere to put it. And on the whole, there's not a lot of checking of that. We know this because we've had consignments which have gone through and there's been no export declaration done for it at all. And we've actually done it the next day in order to pick up the pieces because things were moving ahead of time. Now let's look at the UK flows. So flows into the UK, there is simplified imports into GB known as the deferred entry, which has got a mixed reaction. To be honest, and I'm going to cover that in far more detail later on. I think it's got a mixed reaction because people are a bit fearful of it because it's so unusual. So I'm going to look at deferred entry versus port entry in quite some detail in the next few slides. But certainly from day one, you can enter you can enter GB again with non-controlled goods. So you can enter GB without an import declaration. And you have up to 175 days to do that import declaration. You don't have to take the full 175 days. And often there is this fear of the deferred entry being, well, I can't leave it for 6 months to do the entry. Well, don't do it tomorrow. Do it now. Do it in 6 minutes time. You don't have to wait 6 months. OK, but you can wait up to 6 months. And again, we'll cover that in more detail. Also, the fear is that if you take the deferred entry scheme, you're merely kicking the can down the road, which is what we all accused the government of doing for so long. And when the process is stopped in December, suddenly you're high and dry and you don't have a process at all. The simplified import process today is done under the mechanics of CFSP. CFSP has existed for a long time. And after the 1st of January 2022, I can't believe the time's flying so fast, it will still exist. The only thing that happens after January is that you no longer have 175 days to do the import declaration. It must be submitted by the 4th working day of the following month, following the month of import. So it's still a much smoother process. People are yet to be convinced, but trust me, we'll get there. SPS controls into GB. SPS is the sanitary phytosanitary, so it's health certificates on products of animal origin, phytosanitary certificates on anything with a root, really, or anything that started with a root. All of those were relaxed initially until April, but that's been pushed further. So it's now been relaxed until the end of September, where there is no requirement. From October, There is a requirement for paperwork, so there would be requirement for export declarations from the EU, sorry, export health certificates from the EU, and also an IPAFS declaration into GB, which is a pre-notification. Again, we're going to cover that in more detail. No physical examinations, or if there are, they'll be very rare this year. Come January, then it's full paperwork still, but we've already got used to that by then. We've gone through that pain. And there is the full border control post SPS controls. I'm going to quick sip at my coffee, excuse me. Also, the safety and security declaration, that is not required until January 2022, which is the dreaded ENS. Again, we're very familiar with these because they've been required on day one for Calais, for example, or for EU generally, as they have been for arrivals from sort of Holyhead into Dublin. So those processes are already in place. The UK has relaxed them. Interestingly, well, it has relaxed them until the 1st of January 2022. Interestingly, the EU offered the UK government a sort of free pass on the SNS, on the safety and security declarations, as they similar sort of process they've done with Switzerland, for example, and the UK refused it, said they didn't want to do it. Michael Gove, CDL to his mates, the Chancellor of Duchy of Lancaster, was, and he's not one of my mates, but whatever, but he's still called CDL in most forums. The argument put forward by the government was, how can we take control of our borders if one of the documents we're not going to have is the border control document? And if I get the point, I'm not sure it's a vote winner or a vote loser by not having ENS declarations, because most people in the general public wouldn't even understand what an ENS declaration is. But nonetheless, you never know, the press could get hold of it, and it could be control of your borders without a border control. How does that work? So you can see why. So certainly from the UK, nothing really until Christmas. So it's Brexit Mark II is January 2022. Let's hope it's not like January 2021, which we'll cover in a minute, which was absolutely horrendous, not just for me, but for the team and for probably just about everybody on this webinar. It was a month that we probably never want to repeat, but we got through it. But certainly from January 2022, any of the relaxations which are in place today will either be removed or tightened to what they should normally be. For example, CFSP, so the deferred entry goes, CFSP remains. So it's still an easement, if you like, but it's more compressed. So let's look at January and February. Let's all cast our minds back to what happened. There was lots of talk of, well, you're not ready, you said you'd be ready and you weren't ready, and blah, blah, blah. To everybody, I mean, everybody was in the same boat. There were large groupage operators who suspended services, even though they spent years planning. It was just chaos. And part of the reason for that was that the actual trade deal came out on Christmas Eve. And Christmas Eve was when we first found out that there would be any kind of deal at all. So we literally had 5 days notice. To make matters worse, if you like, is that Brexit, whilst Brexit might be very important to us in the UK, it's not so important to the people in the EU. So when traffic was moving on New Year's Day and the day after New Year's Day, whatever that's called, EU agents were shut. They were celebrating the new year. So we were getting calls from people saying, why can't you raise an export declaration in Holland on midday on New Year's Day? Because they didn't vote for Brexit, really, is the answer. They were going through normal life, and we were going through chaos. So it was an awful period. Data flows were in absolute meltdown. I've never seen so many emails. Anybody who had a document that they required emailed it to everybody they'd ever heard of, and then chased them. We had one chaser. I mean, this one just stood out in my mind because everybody jumped up and down because this chaser had come in. Saying, why haven't you done the declaration? Why haven't you done the declaration? When we checked when we got the data, it was 4 minutes before the chaser. So there are also some unrealistic expectations. SPS controls were super strict from day one. So Calais was strong. Dublin were very strong. They seemed to take it in turns, to be fair. But we found it was quite a shocker that suddenly the actual SPS controls were proper third country controls. There was no relaxation or easement into that. Rules of origin, we only had the rules of origin, the guidance on rules of origin were published on the 30th of December and were valid at 2300 hours the next day. So you basically didn't even have 2 days notice on the complexities of rules of origin. Lots of people still saying, well, why do I need rules of origin? We've got a free trade deal, everything's free. People are still saying that, to be fair. And I want to point out later on the difference between origin and free circulation. They're very different things, and people are still getting very confused by them. Traces and CHEDs, God love them. That was pretty chaotic in the first couple of days. Made worse, really, if you like, by the fact that people who were registered on traces and capable of doing traces declarations, or CHEDs, common health entry documents, but were registered through a GB company, found themselves cut off about 2 weeks before Brexit because their registration was no longer valid. That was a frantic period for us, and it was literally Christmas Eve before we got our traces, new traces registration for our company in Ireland. Had we not got an EU company in the pack, we'd have been completely cut off. Ireland, I say, I keep going back to Ireland, but Ireland was a fantastic learning curve for us, but it really didn't feel like it at the time. It was always going to be a problem in Ireland, because when you look at GB was taking the situation where there were 50 million declarations pre-Brexit and 250 million declarations after Brexit, therefore a multiplier of 5. The multiplier in Ireland was more like 1.2 million declarations pre-Brexit going to 24 million declarations post-Brexit. So whilst the numbers are smaller, the multiplier was huge. And in January, just to prove a point, January would be a quiet month for people avoiding the pain. In Ireland, they handled more declarations in January than they handled in the entire year of 2020. So it was a real big bang in Ireland. Still is to a degree. There's still people trying to find their feet, but it's been, if you're involved in the Irish market, you've really earned your stripes. Then, just to cap it all, in our own operation, which is a 24-hour operation, we decided to have a COVID outbreak. We had to start working remotely, which was part of our business continuity plan, but it wasn't actually something we particularly wanted to do. So everyone had to work remotely. 10 of the team were struck down with COVID, yours truly included. And I was one of those people in the camp that said, well, COVID, I think I probably had it last year. And then I got it. And let me tell you, I would have noticed if I'd have had it before. Whilst it didn't feel particularly life-threatening, it was completely debilitating. It felt like being run over by a truck. So we had all of that to cater for. I'm not sure whether it was a good or bad thing looking back, but there was a point where I'm lying in my sick bed, if you like, just to be over dramatic, with a laptop on my lap and a laser printer beside me, trying to knock out Irish groupages because it was just all hands to the pump. Horrible, horrible period. But we've earned the right to be here now because we've survived that period. So today, completely different. We even have classical music playing in the office. It's like a dentist surgery here. It's so different. It couldn't be more different from the January and February experience. We've improved all the data flow processes. We've installed a data management system called Jira. So that as soon as people send us data, they get a ticket number back immediately, a CCC number, and that allows us to track it and the client to track it. We've now grown to 96 staff across 5 countries. We're 24 hours a day in the UK and Ireland, because to be fair, I don't know any other way of working. I come from customs clearance at Dover, and the thought of not being 24 hours is completely alien to me. We've got 75% of the work that we do now is now on robotics. So we've got RPA, robotic process automation, which is really important thing for us, not just because we can sort of simplify the process a bit, but we can attract better quality people to our business, because the one thing a customs agent doesn't want to do, believe it or not, is a customs entry. They want to do the fancy bit, and I completely agree with them. I went back to sort of when I was in customs clearance in the 80s, and I was thinking, God, I love that job, and I'm so glad it's coming back. And then I kind of thought for a minute, I thought, actually, no, I hated it. It was boring, because a customs entry is 75% copy typing, 25% skill and experience. And what we've done with the robotics is removed an awful lot of the copy typing. So why employ somebody that you can hit them with a stick and they can do 100 entries a day, when you can employ somebody with all of those skills who can program a computer to do 1,000 entries a day? So we're much more in that category. So anyway, that's led us to, I'm not going to publish the real figure, but we're in excess of 2,000 declarations a day, quite comfortably. That's generating around about 35 phone calls a day, just to give you some idea about how much we're into the sort of digital era. So 2,000 declarations a day, 35 phone calls, and pretty much hardly any of those are to do with the customs declarations that we're doing. So that's again completely different from January and February, when people were on hold for so long. One friend of mine said that he was in counselling for our hold music, and the other one found himself humming it when he was walking around the supermarket. So those days have gone now. We're very controlled on the actual customer contact side and the calls into us, because if somebody's having to ring us, something's generally either gone wrong and we don't want to get to that phase. So there's a good metric to keep in mind of more than 2,000 declarations a day doesn't generate 40 phone calls. We're in the process at the moment of opening an ETSF in Kent, acronym land again, but an ETSF is an external temporary storage facility, like an inland port really. Not particularly necessary today, but going forward we think there'll be more transit documents coming into the UK, simply because there'll be more border control, and therefore we're in the process with our partners Alkaline, who are one of the CCC founder members, to open up the ETSF in Kent, and we'll be circulating details of those to particularly logistics companies in the coming weeks or a couple of months max. Our strength in depth has gone beyond, so the 96 team members now, there's a much higher level of quality in there. It's the same people in a lot of cases, but they've learned fast. In the whole process of Brexit Big Bang through to today, we've only lost one person through the stress of it all. Unfortunately, we found out that they suffered from anxiety. Within 5 hours of Brexit, they'd resigned, because there was no more anxiety than there was on day one. But generally speaking, we've seen a really good learning curve throughout everybody. They're dealing with things faster. They're as accurate as they ever were, but now they're doing it faster. And the robotics has helped them to concentrate on that. That's allowed us to attract subject matter experts, and we've appointed them within our business, and we're attracting new ones because we've got a modern, forward-thinking approach about how you do this job. It can't be sitting there knocking out entries. We've said from about 2 years ago, I think, that we actually coined the phrase that Brexit is about data mashing, not keyboard bashing, and our situation hasn't changed. Thanks to the lovely Elaine, who I know is on this call. She's been working pretty much unheeded in the background, really deserted by us, but she's been fantastic and got through it. She's managed to put together a fabulous network of CCC partner agents. And this isn't just as simple as us emailing people going, do you fancy being our agent? We had to go looking for people who shared our vision and shared our approach into how to modernize the business. That's led us to a sort of concept now that we're lovingly calling E2E customs, which is that it's end to end. Like we always think about imports into GB and think, well, we've got to be able to cope with imports. But the first process in any international movement is the export. So there is always an export that kicks the process off, and the import is the second process in the flow. And it's important then that we can cover anything anywhere. Now, what we tend to do, this isn't a kind of, we're not trying to muscle in and try and get a bit of revenue from this or take a margin on what somebody does. We literally have partners this is what the Customs Clearance Consortium is all about, is logistics and customs partners, where we can actually say, we've got a friend who can do that, and they will do it for you directly at the kind of prices that the Customs Clearance Consortium has highlighted as being what it considers to be the market rate. But we don't get in the way. We don't go and slice a bit of margin in it, because it's not required. We just know that if you're going to customs clear in Gdansk, you can speak to Lucas and you'll get the same kind of response as though you would speak him to us. And equally, Lucas knows the same in the UK. So it's been fabulous for us. It's a real strength. Now what we're doing is pushing further away, or pushing further out rather, is that we're now looking at China, the Far East generally. Probably going to look at Dubai as a hub, because there's, as we know, Dubai is a sort of feeding station for between the Far East and the UK anyway. And also the States, if I've not mentioned the States already. There has to be a point to Brexit, and the point to Brexit is world trade. Somebody pointed out the other day on Twitter, actually, that the UK is a couple of weeks away from being the country with more trade deals than any other country on the planet. So hence the reason why we can't just look at, can we customs clear in Calais? Yes, we can. Tick that box. Right, that sounds international. It's not. Brexit's all about the world now, and we've got to be able to move with it. Keeping up, good. I could talk all day. It's my favourite subject. So what now? Where are we at now? We've survived January and February. We all have, and now we're looking at what happens next. We've made some plans to keep things moving, and we're all quite proud of ourselves that we've survived. So, but what happens to the next phase? Well, let's just look at again our sort of timeline graph. First of all, you've got postponed VAT accounting. This has caused more confusion than I thought it would. So we're going to cover that in a bit more detail in a slide. We've also got people saying, I don't want to do VAT postponed accounting. I'd rather pay the VAT at the port of entry. Okay, if that's the way you want to do things, then you can, but it's not necessary. Lots of issues with rules of origin, and it's pretty relaxed at the moment. Like, somebody said to me the other day, well, there's an easement on rules of origin. Well, not really. There's an easement on the proof of the rules of origin in that, well, it's not actually a published easement, but it's more a sort of relaxed approach to it. But from January 22, origin becomes key, and you've got to be able to prove it. I mean, you're going to be able to prove it now, but that's the relaxation. Is like, well, we'll go with the flow, you know. But from January 22, you've actually got to be able to prove that origin. And do not get confused between free circulation and origin. I'll show you what that looks like in a little while. GVMS is not in place today, really, well, not in any great way, apart from on the sort of Northern Ireland flows, because it's there as a control mechanism, and even then, mostly on GBNI and not particularly on NIGB. Although there really shouldn't be anything on NIGB, but there are some controlled exports. What that means is you basically don't have a border. There are some controls, particularly inventory-linked ports, where which are more geared around sort of container traffic. It's more cumbersome with anything with wheels and a driver because it's harder to act fast. But inventory linking exists today, particularly on the east coast of UK. And GVMS, if you look at Eurotunnel and Dover, is not yet in place. And when it does come in place, things are going to get a little bit tighter. Okay, and that's really the message here is the processes will get tighter. They won't get different, they'll just tighten up. Okay, and that's when you've got to be ready for that. It's much easier right now, as in postponed accounting is available right now. It's also much easier right now to apply for your own duty deferment account. You can do that up to £10,000 without any bank guarantee. You can actually get more than £10,000 if you've got good financial standing, and you actually only have to cover greater than your financial capabilities, really. Equally, CFSP approval has been simplified, shall we say. It was one of the hardest applications we've ever done. I'd say it's been simplified, but it's still one of the hardest applications that we do. But we're already CFSP approved. We handle a lot of those approvals for our clients. So we'll talk to you a little bit about how we can help you do that too. So that's where we are. That's where we're sitting right now. Let's go back to number one a minute, which is the postponed VAT accounting. This really is causing more confusion than I thought it would, and maybe it's just because I come from customs clearance years ago when we were typing the bloody things, and you had VAT postponed account. You started life with VAT postponed accounting, and you ended up with duty deferment accounts and VAT at importation. So VAT at importation has always been quite alien to me. Postponed accounting was always what we had, and used to have these big music sheet VAT certs, if anyone's old enough to remember those, used to arrive in a van, and the agent used to have to post them to the importer. God, I'm old. Oh, never mind, we're getting there. So let's look at VAT postponed accounting. Let's look at what the benefits of VAT postponed accounting are. First and foremost is it's a boost to your cash flow by not being a drain on your cash flow. The other one is there is no need to register for VAT postponed accounting. You are auto-enrolled. I was on a meeting recently with quite a few agents who were saying that it would really help us if customs would auto-enroll importers for VAT postponed accounting. There is no enrolment. How can you auto-enroll for something that doesn't require enrolment? Anyway, so, but with the VAT postponed accounting, which you already have that approval, by the way, you can thank me for that one, but you already had it. There's nothing to pay at import. You just account for the VAT, and I'll show you on the next slide how you do that. When you account for it and you then balance it on your next return, it's a simultaneous pay and reclaim process. So it's just a paperwork exercise. It's pretty nonsense, really, but nonetheless, it's balanced by your VAT return. And don't underestimate VAT here. A lot of customs clearance is about VAT, but equally, a lot of the controls are centered around VAT because it's the constant in all of this. So VAT, don't underplay it. Obviously, I'm not accusing you of doing that, but don't underplay it. It is a control mechanism. And I also think it's got a role to play on the island of Ireland as being a control mechanism. If you don't have, if you've not yet done your import entries, you have to estimate your input tax figure. I was going to say deduction, but it's not really a deduction. You have to estimate your import VAT, let's call it, because you haven't yet done your import entries. And that's giving people the heebie-jeebies as well, because they're thinking, well, I've got to estimate it, then I've got to fix it. What if the estimation's not right? Look, it doesn't matter. You estimate it. I'll show you on the next slide why it's not super important. One thing to note, though, is if there is any error on a customs entry which involves VAT and only VAT and not duty. For example, you've paid standard rate VAT on children's clothing, and then the customer says it should be 0 rated. Generally speaking, you can't change it. You can't retrospectively amend an import declaration for VAT purposes only. And the reason for that is it all comes out in the wash anyway through the VAT return. So certainly you can amend, you can post amend an import entry if there's a VAT complication. Sorry, a duty complication where you've either paid too much and you want some back, or you realise you haven't paid enough and you want to offer some more. It's a rarity, but it does happen. But on VAT, generally speaking, you can't do a post-clearance amendment on an entry for VAT only. If you qualify for Intrastat, in that you're over the threshold for Intrastat, then you have to continue to do that until such time as customs tell you you don't have to do that. It's particularly important if you're using the deferred entry, because there is some other record other than the fact that you're waiting to do an entry. So let's look at the process of input and output VAT. Now, I was taught this years ago because VAT is a complicated subject, and I mean, it's way more complicated than I'm going to go into here, but I'm just talking about cross-border VAT, really. There are all the complications of it must be in the course of your business and da-da-da-da. So there are other legal obligations, but the one thing I'm just going to do is just the mechanics of it. So if you pay VAT on purchases, that's considered as an input. It's quite simple. That's like a credit almost. If you charge VAT on your services, that's an output. So typically it's your VAT on purchases is your input, your VAT on sales is your output. And the difference between the two when you do your VAT return is what you have to pay to the VAT man. That's it in a nutshell. If your input is higher than your output, then that's the figure that you reclaim from the VAT man because you've paid more VAT than you've charged. That's it really in a nutshell. If you, however, are using import VAT accounting, that figure is accounted for on your VAT return in a similar type of way that EC sales would have been accounted for on your VAT return, but it doesn't affect your the amount that you're paid. It doesn't affect your output. It's not offset against your output, unless you have paid VAT at importation, in which case it will offset your output because you've already paid it. So you don't have to pay the VAT man again for something you already paid. Now just look on the left-hand side here. Why would you pay VAT at importation? Whenever we come across this, and we come across quite a few of these, it's always been related to a port entry because there's no time to think. It's been incorrect coding on the entry. There's been a deferment fee of between 2% and 3% because the importer is not able to pay it. Therefore, the agent's paid on their behalf. The goods have been held to ransom because you've got to pay this money before I can release the goods. The process suddenly becomes then very confused. You've got a C79 VAT certificate arriving with you for VAT, which you paid at importation because that's what you thought you had to do. And you've got an online VAT statement for the VAT, which has been put against your VAT number as postponed accounting. So suddenly you've got two processes on the go. The C79, the old green, I think looks like a massive banknote. The C79 will come to you by post or carrier pigeon or however, but the postponed VAT accounting process will, just make sure I'm not muted myself, will arrive with you or is available to you online at all times. I think going back to the sort of port entry bit, like we've seen this. Well, in fact, this was anecdotal before, and we were saying, well, look, there is this process of this unnecessary stress, and I want to home in on that in a minute. The other thing is, don't forget that you've got the exports are zero rated. They're not zero rated because of reverse charge as they were before, and they weren't particularly zero rated before. It was a reverse charge scheme. It's not the same thing. But exports from the EU are zero rated because they're leaving the EU, and exports from GB are zero rated because they're leaving that customs territory, and the import declaration has to account for the VAT either by paying it or postponed VAT accounting, which is the thing I'm talking about here. And postponed VAT accounting applies in France, in Ireland. Payment of VAT at the point of import is not the case in Italy, for example. So you just got to look at certain economies and say, do they need the cash? Does that government need the cash? And maybe Italy, because of controls or just because of cash, they actually want the payment and then you have to claim it back. But in all cases, whenever there is the ability to postpone it, just about everybody always has. And I'm just flabbergasted when people say to me, oh, no, I definitely don't want to use VAT postponed accounting. It's up to the importer, obviously, but it's an odd decision. My point being here, though, as well, is that you suddenly, if you is make a rule and stick to that rule. What's happening at the moment is this people doing, well, some of it, if that agent does it, it's postponed accounting. If that agent does it, it's prepaid. Pick an agent. I mean, whether that's us or whether that's someone else, pick an agent, stick your flag in that agent and say, if you've got anything to do with my imports or my exports, you speak to my partner. If you're able to do it yourself in-house, 24 hours a day, do it. If not, find someone that's going to do it for you and look after your needs. Now I'm going to home in on that unnecessary stress again. This is a real life example that happened to a company that's very close to us. This is exactly what happened because they were making decisions under stress. This was 3 loads. It was ice cream actually coming into GB. The haulier chose the agent. The importer, our friend, was just grateful that there was an agent. When this was in the chaotic period. So they're grateful that the haulier even knew an agent. The agent charged £35 for customs clearance per truck, pretty reasonable. It's about the same where we are. They also paid £7,000 VAT on each load. Ice cream is VATable, by the way, but the importer is based in GB and has a GB VAT number and therefore is eligible for VAT postponed accounting. But they didn't claim it because the coding was wrong on the entry. They paid the duty on the VAT rather on their deferment account and charged the importer £250 advancement fee. So what's happened in that scenario in red here is there was £855 in fees for the 3 trucks and a £21,000 hole in the cash flow, which didn't need to happen. Now, this wasn't a fly-by-night agent that set up overnight. This agent had been in business 20 years, but it's in some ways embedded into their psyche that this is what you do because VAT postponed accounting didn't used to exist. Again, I come from that era where it was the norm, and then payment on VAT, payment at point of import was unusual. So maybe I'm just looking at it differently. And I'm not blaming the agent, but 20 years in, you should really know that 1, you don't need to auto enroll, and secondly, just put the right code in one box on the entry, and there's nothing to pay. The other thing is origin. I'm going to come back to that in a minute. Is that how do you know that ice cream's EU origin? Because it came from Italy. Is there an origin statement on the invoice? I'll tell you something, there isn't. Therefore, does the importer have knowledge of that origin? I tell you, they didn't. Okay, now this is a real life example, and I don't blame anybody for this, but the importer was acting under stress. He wanted his ice cream. It was stuck at the port. The haulier's shouting at him. The customer wants his ice cream. So they're making decisions under a stressful situation that they don't necessarily need to be under. And it's because of this. They're seeing that when you arrive at the frontier, somebody's going to stop you and go, you go no further. You must have all of your documentation. You already have an import entry. If you're importing into the UK, your import entry is already done. it's done now. Everything that's coming in from the EU, your import entry is already done. I tell you why, because it's your EORI number. Under the deferred entry scheme, your import entry is already done. It's just waiting for the goods. It's waiting for you to declare what you've received. So far from that being a you must stop, which of course is being fed by the media in some ways, that vehicle's free to go, because you know, can I have your import declaration? Here it is. It's this EORI number. Thank you, sir. On your way. Have a nice time. It really is as simple as that. But I'm going to ram that point home in a few slides' time. Right, you've survived over 45 minutes so far. I'm going to turn this into 2 hours if it kills me. I'm sorry it's 2 hours, but as you can see, an hour is never enough to get into this level of detail. Let's look at origin and regime. The rules of origin. The TCA, the Trade Cooperation Agreement, and I'm going to look particularly at GB imports, says pretty much if the goods are EU origin, then they're duty free. It's not always the case, but it is mostly the case. There's some particular imports which are still dutiable, steel, for example. There must be a statement of origin by the exporter, and at the bottom of that slide there is what the statement of origin needs to look like, which can be for a period or can be specific to that movement. If the exporter, if the value of the goods is over €6,000, that exporter must also have a REX number, a registered exporter number in the EU, which he must also put on that statement. Under that, they can just put their EORI number. If you don't have that statement, here's this kind of easement piece. Then you can use the importer's knowledge. Now, the import this is a sort of oxymoron really, because the importer's knowledge, this is an importer who wasn't even ready for Brexit, is now supposed to have detailed knowledge of rules of origin. So the importer's knowledge is in inverted commas really, and that's why it's been relaxed. Is that, you know, in a lot of cases this, you know, Brexit. Well, we know that Brexit was going to expose 150,000 traders to a process that they were unfamiliar with, and that's customs documentation. How many traders are familiar with rules of origin? And I mean, it's a huge number. So suddenly to have importers' knowledge is fine for the more savvy importer, but for the people who are doing this for the first time, they don't necessarily have that knowledge, and that's where they get confused between free circulation and origin, which are different things. Excuse me, taking a quick sip. Also, when you have importers' knowledge, like, well, yeah, that's from the EU, I'm pretty sure it is, therefore it is. That must be based on evidence that you've obtained from the supplier and you have in your records. Because of this sort of relaxation is you don't need to have that evidence from day one, but you must use best endeavours to obtain it. From January the 1st, 2022, you must have it either in your records, or it's a statement covering a period, or it is specifically quoted on an invoice. Don't forget the origin. It's really, really important. And I'll cover free circulation a little bit more, but I might touch on it now actually. Is that if the goods come from China and are customs cleared in the EU and then end up in GB, they're still Chinese. The fact that they were paid, the duty was paid on them in the EU, doesn't somehow magically make them EU goods. We've been really surprised at the origins of goods coming out of Europe, and I would say 30% of what we've been exposed to so far is non-EU origin. I think we've all just become a bit lazy and we're just assuming. Then let's do a real killer. GSP, General System of Preferences. This is normally a one-way trade agreement where it's to support developing countries or lesser developed developing countries. The difference between an FTA, a free trade agreement, and a GSP agreement is that we don't want it, it's not reciprocal. We're just actually saying, look, we want to support that territory, typically Commonwealth countries and so on and so forth. Myanmar, for example, used to be Burma. We're actually trying to support those countries in their development. So GSP was created. When you look at GSP, the EU has a GSP arrangement with a group of countries, and there is no duty in nearly all cases with a formal GSP preference certificate. The UK has a GSP agreement with the same countries, believe it or not, because the UK has pretty much done rollover deals in as many cases as they can. When we looked at a particular product coming out of a GSP country, we realised that it had come in via the EU and was then coming to GB. Now the EU we know is duty free, and the UK we know is duty free, therefore must be duty free. Now, because of the way it was routed and because there wasn't direct transportation, that flow of goods, specifically because they've been put into free circulation in the EU, are now subject to duty in GB. This particular product equated to 80% duty. Now that's an enormous duty figure. I mean, there are not many in the tariff that say 80%, but this was an ad valorem and weight-based duty. So it was 8% of the value and £38 per 100 kilos. And this was a particularly low value, dense product. 80% duty. And the reason why is that single statement there. The UK does not have an agreement in place with the EU to allow traders to use a replacement proof of origin to redistribute GSP goods between the EU and the UK. Had those goods come directly to, and in fact they were processed in the EU, but not significantly or not sufficiently. But let's just use the simple terms here. Had those goods come directly to the UK, they would have been duty free. Had they gone directly to the EU, they were duty free. Because the way they were routed, that single statement, that single sentence has potentially cost the importer, the goods have almost cost double. Okay, so really, really pay attention. There's an awful lot of stuff on the website, and one sentence can be the difference between make or break. Okay, lesson over. Let's talk about reliefs. First of all, return goods relief. This is particularly relevant to Irish imports because Ireland is quite often run as a satellite of GB in terms of supply lines. So what we came across quite a lot was like Poland to GB storage, like flatbreads. We always use flatbreads as an example. So you've got flatbreads produced in Poland, come into GB storage for distribution to retail. Some of that retail ends up in Ireland because the retailer has an Irish store. The goods have not been altered in any way in GB. They're exactly the same condition that they were when they left Poland. They've not been touched in GB. Therefore, surely they are duty free. Actually, the complete opposite. Because they've not been touched or processed in GB, they don't qualify for the TCA. They're not GB origin. And the trade cooperation agreement, whilst allowing GB goods duty-free entry into the EU and EU goods duty-free entry into GB, ironically, don't allow EU goods duty-free entry into EU via GB. I know that sounds nuts, but that's the process. So there's lots of paperwork on EU to EU via GB distribution centre. There was some talk that it was made almost cosmetically difficult in order not to assist GB distribution centres, but that's eased up since then. What there is RGR, return goods relief. So if you can prove that the goods have been returned, not to the country they came from, but the customs territory that they came from. So if they came from Poland, they came from the EU, they were stored in GB, they ended up in Ireland, which is also in the EU. So return goods relief is to the customs territory, not the exact person or country. Okay, so the returns good relief is applicable in this situation. In order to claim returns goods relief, you require the export, the MRN number of the original export declaration that moved the goods from Poland to GB. That can sometimes be hard to obtain, but if there's enough money involved, you'll find it. There's an INF3, an information form 3, which is often required, but only if you don't have the export MRN and you want to kind of give more evidence because that's missing. We've hardly come across any INF3s, but we come across a lot of export MRNs. And in most cases, the claim for relief does not include VAT unless the goods are actually being returned to the exact company that they came from. But as again, I was saying with that postponed accounting, so what, you're fine. It doesn't include VAT, but not costing anything, and you account for it in your next VAT return anyway. That table below, which this presentation is available online after this event anyway. I'll tell you where at the end. So don't try and read everything on that table, but that's our internal guidance that we use so that we know this is for imports into Ireland, so that we know if the origin is GB, we do that. If it's EU, we do that. And if we can't find the MRN, we have to treat it as a third country, in which case we do that. Okay. Reliefs, let's do inward and outward processing relief. This will become more prevalent. At the moment, people are it's bubbling under a little bit where people are thinking, oh, hang on a minute, do I need a bit of IPR in here? Or IPOP, but I still come from the school when it was IPR, OPR. The main rule here really is the duty only applies when the goods stop or when they reach their destination market. So if you have a temporary export for process and return, the import of that process, the import for that export, if you like, they're not staying there, they're just being processed and they're coming back. So you want a duty relief, you don't have to pay the duty. The goods don't pay duty until they reach their destination market. Equally, if you're importing for process and re-export, it's the same thing, just in reverse. The duty is only on the added value or the process itself. And be very conscious of yield. Whenever you're doing an IPR application, the yield is very important. So when I send out one of them, what do I get back? And if you're sending out, I don't know, we were looking at something before where we were sending out cheese. It was being made into a cheese spread with a mixture of butter and water and other fancy or lovely French ingredients, as it happens. And it came back as cheese spread. The yield was actually 2 for 1. So for every kilo that went out, 2 kilos of spread came back. In all cases, it's pretty much starts life as a 3-legged stool. So taking this circle, starting at number 1, you've got an OPR out. So you've got an outward processing relief export. Excuse that screen popping up. I wondered when it would. So you've got an outward processing relief export. You've got it's crossing the frontier. You've got an inward processing relief import as a temporary importation. You perform the process. You then re-export the IPR and you re-import the OPR. You don't necessarily need all legs of the stool. I mean, you can have IPR without OPR, and you can have OPR without IPR, I guess. I've not come across it much. It all depends on where the duty rates are in which side, because it's the duty that drives it. If you, for example, bring goods in under IPR duty suspension to process them, and then by hook or by crook, you only re-export half of them, you pay duty on the half that you didn't re-export because they're now entered the home market and their home use. So the kind of default position is what you were going to do anyway. And the best situation is you bring it in, put it under IPR, and then send out anything you send back after processing. It needs prior approval for IPR particularly. Yeah, there is an application by declaration requirement, a process rather, but that requires a guarantee. So you're better off getting approval, really. The choice of process that you use is very much based on the duty rate involved. And the entry coding is completely vital. This is where you end up in CPC territory, which I was on a webinar with customs the other day and thinking, oh, this is all very understandable. And then they went into CPC land. Customs procedure codes are complex. That's what you pay a customs agent for, or that's what you do an enormous amount of customs training for. It's a complex piece, and it's important to, one, understand it and to apply it correctly. So that's IPR. And breathe. Take a breather a minute. We're going to talk about the deferred entry scheme once I've had a sip of my coffee. Thank you. I hope you can't hear that horrible noise of me slurping. But okay. Let's talk about the deferred entry, which is this process of bring the goods in, you can do the customs entry later, which people have become almost fearful of, I have to say. Here's what it is. I was on a webinar the other day with HMRC, and they did a survey, and these were the results. So on the left-hand side, are you planning to use what really is the deferred entry scheme? 11% nailed on, absolutely yes. You've got to remember that this is an HMRC webinar. They don't kidnap people and make them watch it. You're only watching this if you're interested in what you're doing. Therefore, you've got to sort of temper the responses by these are people who want to be compliant and who want to do the right thing. I'm more worried about the people who don't attend these because they're sitting there not doing any declarations at all. But anyway, this is about the deferred entry scheme. So are you intending to use the scheme? 11%, absolutely yes I am. 21%, absolutely no I'm not. Greater figure, obviously. Don't know why, but I can understand why, because people's controls are not necessarily very good. The really interesting one is unsure. 68 of people are saying, I'm not sure if I'm going to use the deferred entry scheme, which probably means they already are because they're not actually sure what they're doing. There might be quite a lot of poor entries in there, but there's 68% of the market in May, this was only the other day, are still not sure what to do. And this is from a group of people who are on a webinar to find out what to do. So these are kind of people looking for a solution and they don't know what the solution is. There's more people not even looking for a solution because they don't even understand the question. Right hand side, who's going to do that for you? Well, I'm going to have a crack at it myself. It's 14%. Now that's big brands, absolutely fine. They've got the software in place. Might not necessarily have the frontier piece in place if and when a frontier piece is required, but nonetheless, you know, they've had a look at the software. It looks doable. I'm going to get my intermediary to help me, or I'm going to get, or the third one down, I'm going to get my intermediary to do it, because let's play to our strengths here. You know, let's not try and, you know, if you make something and sell it, don't try and do customs entries. I'm not going to try and make your product. So you concentrate on what you do because you do that really well, and we'll concentrate on what we do because we do that really well. And together we're going to crack this. But you're never going to be as good as we are if you're not already a customs agent. You're never going to be as good at customs declarations as we are, and we're never going to be as good at making what you make as you are. Let's just get on with it and move on. There's a big pack of unsures in there as well. So 36% of people, I guess that's 36% of the 11% who have said, yeah, we're absolutely going to use the deferred entry. I've got no idea what I'm going to do with it though, or how I'm going to handle it. Anyway, but they're getting away with it. And the reason why they're getting away with it, and I'm not saying that's they're getting away with it like they've committed some kind of crime, is they're getting away without making these decisions, is what I mean. It's because GVMS isn't yet in place and the system's not as locked down, not as tight as it will be. And that's a really important concept to grasp, is things are just going to just screw the lid on a bit tighter. So once GVMS, well, because GVMS isn't in place, there's actually nowhere to pre-lodge, to lodge the pre-lodged MRN anyway. So people always say to me, well, I need a port entry, I need a port entry. And if you're coming in through Dover, and I go, okay, I've got the entry number, I'll take it home because I've got nowhere to put it, because the GVMS system doesn't exist on that flow, and that's the GVMS system that requires the MRN, and it's not there, so I've not got it. So I put it in my briefcase, take it home in case anybody rings me. I don't know why. So there's no real controls on inbounds. A port entry as well, like if I do a port entry today and I've got a GVMS, I've got an entry number now really, but nowhere to put it, it's exactly the same as me doing a subdeck tomorrow. Again, you don't have to take 6 months. In order to sign up for the deferred entry scheme doesn't mean you've got 6 months. You must do your entries in 6 months. It means you have up until 6 months. You can do them. You can do the easy ones tomorrow. You can do the difficult ones where you're really not sure about that origin and you don't want to ask your agent to do a non-compliant entry. You just need a bit of time to think. Take your time. Do the ones you can do. Worry about the other ones tomorrow. But try not to have a mix of processes. Otherwise, you're suddenly into this. Well, I've got this information coming through here. I've got full frontier decks on this bit. I've got simplified frontier declarations on this bit, and I've got full EIDR on this bit. Pin your tail on one of the donkeys and make that your donkey. When GVMS comes in, there will be more controls. You can't go round the border anymore. It'll be a bit like inventory linking today. But what we are going to show you is that, well, you can't go round it. I'm going to show you how to get over it. I love this next bit. We ask this a lot of traders when they receive goods from the EU to GB, is how do you know it's cleared? This is surprisingly common. The answer often is because it's here, idiot. How could it have got here if it wasn't cleared? And I get it. If I order something from Amazon and it arrives from America and the guy knocks on my front door, and as he does every day, and we bring the goods in, I never think, I wonder if they're customs cleared. You just, if it's a delivered price and a lot of it is delivered, then the feeling is if it got here, it's cleared, because if it wasn't cleared, it'd still be at the port, you fool, is how people look at you. Not so. Those goods are going to come straight through, and how do you know they're cleared? Because you've got them in your hand doesn't mean they're cleared. And I say it's particularly relevant with delivered terms. So rather than ask, how is it cleared? Let's turn this on its head. And how do you know it's here? Now, that sounds like a stupid question, but rather than saying, how do you know those goods that are here are cleared? Let's actually look at it and say, how do you know these goods are here? I'll tell you how you know, because they're in your records that tell you that they're here. And that's precisely what entry in declarants records is. Your inventory is the trigger. You only declare what you enter in your records. Somebody once said to me, though, that if we use entry in declarants records and we give our EORI number at the frontier, somebody will get hold of our EORI number and all of it will come through on our EORI number. Doesn't matter if it does, unless the person who's using your EORI number in an unauthorized way also breaks into your office, opens your records and puts that in your records. It's nothing to do with you. Your responsibility is what you've entered in your records. This gives you time to think, gives you time to validate the origin, make sure you've got the right duty, make sure you've covered things like the GSP, or is it GSP, how was it routed, make sure that if it is importer's knowledge, have I got that knowledge? We work with a large importer in GB that flows from Ireland. very super organized using SAP. I mean, their data includes CPC codes, commodity codes, second quantities, super organized. It's taken them 3 months to get the import declarations data ready because they wanted to validate the origins, because they're a big brand and they can't be seen to be doing it wrong. And they can't, in fact, there's nothing to be seen to be, they can't be doing it wrong. So it's taken them 3 months to get comfort on the origins. Now they're super organized. Everyone else is throw it at the port, everything's fine, came from the EU, that'd be good. Where's the difference there? The difference is the second one had time to think. Okay. The other thing you get about entering declarants records is that it's nothing to do with the truck. The truck is removed from the process and you're actually entering what's in your records. So it can be a consolidated import declaration. But the most important thing for me is you've got time to have a bit of a sit back and think, catch your breath without delaying the goods. Don't make that decision under unnecessary stress. Have a bit of a think. Decide how you want these goods to be entered. You don't have to take 175 days. A port entry is the same as a subdeck. A subdeck is the same as a port entry. It's just timing. So you could do a port entry now, pre-lodged. I mean, how do you know when the goods are here? It's the same question. So when do you arrive that port entry? When the goods have arrived. Well, why do that? Why not just do an entry when the goods have arrived? It's this reticence towards the deferred scheme is because people are not confident in their own records. Get your records right and everything will fall into place. So we handle CFSP applications on behalf of our clients, mostly free of charge, because we want you to have CFSP. We want to be able to look after those declarations for you. We only charge if we're not going to be looking after the entry in declarants records supplementary declarations, because we've got to make some money somewhere. I'm afraid that's how the world goes around. But if we're actually contracted to look after the supplementary declarations, we will handle a CFSP application without charge. One of the benefits for us is that it literally does divorce the movement of the freight from the movement of the truck. So it takes away all the stress at the frontier. Still not sure? Let me tell you another thing. 150,000 traders have been exposed to declarations for the first time because of Brexit. But there is probably an equal number of traders, and I actually have the data on this. This is the first time I've come up with a spreadsheet that's 1 million lines long. But an equal number of traders have been dealing with non-EU forever. Now, when you actually looked at, for example, clothing imports in the run-up to Brexit, the people that were importing clothing, they've been working in Brexit for years. So the people like Next Retail are saying, like, I'm not that bothered about Brexit, really. It's only going to affect about 5% of my flow because your clothes don't come from the EU. Might say Prada in it, but it probably came from Bangladesh. And if you're lucky enough to have anything that you're wearing from Prada, and why you're wearing it to work, will be the next question. Prior to Brexit, of the 50 million declarations, or the import declaration, or at least the import declaration slice of that, between 70 and 75% of those were handled on CFSP, and still are. So suddenly these 200 million newbies come into the pot, and everyone thinks, don't trust the tried and tested system, I want this other one. I want to do port entries because, well, I don't know. Explain to me why. The other thing is I don't want to use the tried and tested cobbled together last minute response, which was TSP, if you like. TSP, the Transitional Simplified Procedure, was a watered down CFSP. And I know the agent community, we were all clubbing together with customers saying, stop reinventing stuff. Use the mechanics we've already got, just soften it, relax it, and then gradually phase it in, gradually tighten it up. But don't invent something new. And on the whole, they listened, and we ended up with deferred entry in declarants records. This is a journal from 1998 talking about the benefits of CFSP. Now, I used to do, when I was doing these seminars before, I used to show an import declaration. When people were saying, we won't need import declarations after Brexit, and I used to show on the screen a massive image of an import declaration for Apollo 11 and the moon rocks that were on it, where the country of dispatch was the moon and the destination was Honolulu. And that required an import entry. And I kind of made the point of if Apollo 11 required an import entry, what exactly makes you think you don't? This is the same thing here. This journal was in 1998, but CFSP has been around since 1995 and was created originally for the fast parcel operators to keep things flowing, and was then pushed out into the more savvy import flows. So some of the largest brands out there today are using CFSP. There's a reason for that, and you really need to look at why you should be going down that line. You don't need CFSP today, because if an agent such as us who's already CFSP approved, you can use ours, and hence the reason why we'll help you to obtain your own, so that from January you're using your own CFSP. But don't worry, if you're not, you can still use ours until you do. Still not convinced? Agent's going to hate me for this one. When is a truck not a truck? Take 3 trucks there at £35 a pop. Our ice cream man. Okay. When is a truck not a truck? When it's a subdec. When it's a supplementary declaration, there is no truck on the supplementary declaration. You can do 1 per day. Okay, so if you've got 3 trucks coming on day 1, that's either 3 times 35 quid, what's that, 105, or 1 subdec line for the 3 trucks that have come in that day. That's on the standard aggregation. You can aggregate up to 10 days. So the system's tried and tested. You can do 1 entry per day. It's a simplified frontier process. It's a single process. You've got time to think, and you've got clear reporting lines. Honestly, I'll fight you if you still think CFSP is not a good idea. A single process for me is very important, because of this higgledy-piggledy process otherwise, that you've got some VAT on VAT postponed accounting, some VAT on C79, I've got to reclaim it. I had somebody was talking the other day saying we've got MSS data, they subscribe to MSS data, so they're obviously very organised. They subscribe to MSS data with customs. The MSS data shows all their port entries. The MSS data shows their simplified frontier decks, but it doesn't show IDA. So I don't know what to do. I think I'm going to do port decks. And so your problem with that process is you've got 3 processes. So you're trying to control 3 things. Why take one, no matter which one it is, take one of them. If you're going to do port entries, do everything on port entry. If you're going to do SFDs, which is a simplified frontier declaration, in order to do an SDP, a simplified declaration process, which is one down from entry and declaration records, do that. But don't use all 3 and then worry about how you're going to control it. Choose a process, stick your tail on the donkey, get on the donkey. Whew. What do we do? Now, we've learned fast. We've had to learn fast, because January and February was you couldn't go on like you did. There was a process. There was a time in January when I was trying to message our teams, and we could only communicate through Teams because email and phones were just swamped. And I couldn't send a message to the guys on ops for receiving messages. So I had to go and buy another phone, one for receiving and one for sending, because for typing the message, I couldn't get the message out for receiving messages. Lots of people were worried. We made mistakes. We all made mistakes, I think, but we've learned fast from those mistakes, and the company now is unrecognizable from what it was in January and February. Yeah, there are still some scars. You know, some people say, well, you let us down here, you let us down. But everybody was in that situation. Everybody was in that boat. And there isn't anybody who went home on, I don't know, the 3rd of January and go, well, that went rather well. There wasn't anybody that said that. So we've got to keep this in context. And as Matt RFD said to me, we've earned the right to be saying what we're saying now, because we've got through that process, and we've really invested heavily, or turn that investment into what we're going to do next. And handling in excess of 2,000 declarations a day says we're doing something well. We're starting to it was about February actually where we started to get compliments rather than complaints, and you could feel it turning, but it was towards the end of February, I must say. But now it is what it is. You know, the compliments are more common than the complaints. Now, how have we done that, or what do we do going forward? Well, one of the ways is you have this operations machine, if you like, that is sitting there and we're training them, and it sounds like a sweatshop, but it's not. If it were a sweatshop, it would be in India. It isn't. It's robotics. People often say to me, you know, are the robots going to replace the people? No, the robots have replaced the Indian function, because they're populating the repetitive stuff. Then they're putting, and actually they're getting more accurate, or they are more accurate than a real person, because a real person who's got the skills and knows how to do an entry will turn off at some points during the entry. Done it myself, and suddenly you put the wrong currency, or you put the gross rate in the value box. The robot's stupid. It only knows what we tell it to do. So if you tell me it's US dollars, it's US dollars. If you tell me that's the gross rate, that's going in the gross rate box. Then our guys can just come in and polish the job off with all the fancy coding that's required, which is our raison d'etre, if you like. So what do? We bring customers in now into our white glove service, which is an initial 3-month welcome pack, if you like, which is because we know you can't just sort of chuck it into ops and go, get on with that. So that can't happen from the customer's point of view and also from our team's point of view. So we have an initial high care phase, which allows us to refine all the processes with the client to get the data flows as slick and smooth as we can, so that you're not giving us too much data, but you are giving us enough data. And bearing in mind, in January and February, there was quite often the case where it was too much data was still wrong data. Okay, so we get the data flows are very important to what we do. The codes are validated, so we're checking HS codes. We've got AI for that. We've got coders for that full time. We also got a lot of experience now in the Y codings and PNR codes that we've used, so that we can compare against real time. The operating procedures are written so that everybody knows what's expected, and that's all mapped into our SLA tracker in the background. And only when we're all comfortable does it then pass from the high care into the account management, so that the high care can take on the next phase. Now, account management and process, one of the things we focused on really heavily was the SLAs. We kept getting people saying, we need an SLA, we need an SLA. Now, in January, we honestly drafted a letter to clients to say that our SLA was 72 hours. Okay, I mean, it was that bad that we were writing to customers to say, if you give us data, you can expect your documentation in 72 hours. We never sent that letter. Our SLA today is 2 hours. Within a certain time frame. So if you provide data to us by 0800 to 1900, it's a 2-hour turnaround, 4-hour max. Outside of those hours, it's a bit longer because we want the evening shifts to look after things. They're not production, they're caretakers. Okay, so the way we manage this is we put it all into our Jira ticketing system, and every SLA is recorded against the client and the route. That graphic, although the graphic clearly isn't our office, the screen in the middle with all the green on it that's a screen dump of an enormous screen that's in our main ops office, which shows the SLAs, and you can see there's different tones of green in there. They then start to change color if we're getting close to the SLA, so it starts to go orange where we're getting close to the 2 hours. If it goes red, it's like the fire alarm's gone off. Senior management get a text message to say there's been an SLA breach, and therefore we're all down into the ops office going, what's happened with this, what's happened with that, how do we stop that happening again? I don't want to get those text messages. Matt doesn't want to get those text messages, but that's the process that we put in place so that we're as inconvenienced as you are. It also means is when you walk in the ops office, you don't have to walk around all the desks saying, how's it going? And surprisingly, everyone goes, yeah, pretty good, thanks. There's a massive screen that's telling me how it's going, and I can walk straight into the ops office and go, what's the situation with that one? It's orange. And immediately everybody's on it. Well, they're on it anyway, but immediately I can walk in and know exactly what's going on in that ops office from the screen in that ops office, but equally from the feed I get here. There was a ticket scene system clear out yesterday while we were rescheduling some stuff, and the entire screen was red. It was chaos for about 5 minutes until the guys go, no, I'm cleaning it up, I'm cleaning it up. I was literally refiling. Okay, let's get it done. But everything's driven by that. SLA, if we don't provide the service within the times you're expecting to receive the service, there's not much point in us doing what we're doing. One of the things we've really concentrated on is data. A customs agent can't make an entry up. And equally, we've moved on from the 80s. This idea of sending a PDF of the invoice is worse than 1980. It's like sending a fax. I mean, the good thing about fax is it printed itself. Now you get a PDF of an invoice and you think, well, what data created that invoice? And if there was data that created that invoice, send me the bloody data, not the result of the data, because we can do something with that data. Now, one of the things we made, but we quickly made this, and it's been brilliant. This is like the House of the Rising Sun, wasn't it? The song that was written in 5 minutes and it never worked again. This is our House of the Rising Sun, is that we created what we lovingly call the RPA. It's the robotic process automation. So it allows a single style of data capture, which it's an Excel at the moment. It will become a portal. We're working on that at the moment. But right now it's an Excel because you can keep local copies of it, and that kind of people quite like that. Make your own templates. But it's an Excel with bells on, really, because when you're putting in the commodity code for the good, it's validating it and telling you if we like it, and if we don't like it, go away and look again, because it's out of date. When you put in the EORI number of the EU supplier, for example, or the EORI number of the GB importer, there is an EORI checker built in both the EU and GB. It looks at the route and the process that you're asking for and matches it up, so it won't allow you to ask for a process that you don't require. The middle section, which self-populates, you can just see this sort of table in the middle, that actually says, against this information you've given us, this is what we're going to do. So it's actually telling you exactly what we're committed to doing from that information, unless you put an X in the box telling us not to do that function. That's what we're going to do. We've got RGR triggers in there, so if the system detects that the country of origin is the same as the ultimate country of destination, it immediately flags up saying, do you want to reclaim RGR? Have you got the MRN number of the initial export, please? It's also got links and hookups to the updated tariffs for both GB, XI for Northern Ireland, and the EU. So there are 3 tariffs we're working on constantly. XI and EU are very similar, but nonetheless there are some small changes. GB and XI codings are different. So what's a health certificate in GB is an N853 in XI because it's working to UCC rules. SPS controls are embedded, as are MRSing. So if the commodity code is flagging that there's SPS controls, phytosanitary, and therefore there might be a traces or an IPAFS requirement, the system's flagging it immediately. It also creates a pro forma invoice because it felt rude not to, just in case there isn't an invoice available at the time. And also a lot of people saying they don't really want to send an invoice. Well, you don't have to here, or create an invoice for customs purposes only, which includes an origin statement, which we ask you to sign. It also does job costing on the fly. So whilst it's telling you what we're going to do, it's also saying at the back end, it delivers a report to say, this is the data you've given us. This is what we're going to do for that data. And according to our tariff, this is what we're going to charge you. So it really is an Excel with bells on. And in fact, we're struggling a little bit to make it into a portal that's as good as the Excel. Now that's quite an unusual conundrum to have, but that's where we're at. Excuse me. That feeds into our robotics. So all of that process that is completed on the RPA, for example, feeds into the robots, and the robots take care of the repetitive, boring stuff so that we can get on with the good technical bits, such as, is there any duty on this? Can I claim any relief? Can I do this? Can I do that? All of that's built on master tables that we sit in the background as master data, and also correlation tables for P&R codes against commodity codes, against origin, and in some cases now also against consignee, so that we have this kind of matrix of splits. So if we detect that consignee, that origin, that commodity code, we know that's the P&R code for it. So it takes time. It takes about 100 days, and it's pretty much where we are, but we know it's a 100-day journey. That mapping hasn't really changed. The only one that we've always said, we take XML as well. We have an XML format that we can receive. CSV, the amount of people who send us an Excel and call it a CSV because it sounds more modern. It's not a CSV just because you've called it a CSV, but quite a few people do that. They go, well, that sounds a bit more spacey, I'll call it a CSV file, but actually it's an Excel. Just surprising what people do. But most of it now, we've got the robots working. Robots are currently working on IPAF, so we can get that piece covered. More importantly for us is we want to move forward. Is we recognise that it's May. I mean, it's May. What happened to Christmas? It's the longest day soon, and we're not that far away from mid-June when we have the longest day. But the longest day will never be more than the 1st of January, to be fair. But technically, it's 21st of June. Time moves fast. One of the things we're looking at the moment is Chief is the customs handling of import export freight, the main brain of HMRC, which is an IBM product. Not quite as old as the one shown, but not far off. That has a best before date. Talk is that that's next year. It's been replaced by CDS, the Customs Declaration Service. We're already testing for that, and in fact we're talking to customs at the moment saying I can't see any reason why we can't do our subdex on CDS. So we're doing everything on deferred entry and then using CDS so that we're future-proofing the client as well as ourselves. A lot of people fearful of CDS, but we've been using it in Ireland since day one because Ireland uses AIS, which is CDS in another guise really, and Northern Ireland or XI also uses CDS. So we're actually in a situation where we're finding it a bit odd to use Chief, probably in the same way that we're finding it a bit odd to pay VAT. Is that we come from a world where we just want to keep moving forward, and Chief just feels backward, if I'm honest. And also, what's the point of onboarding a client, getting him used to a certain situation and going, right, got that? Right, now let's change it. we know our data capture is already CDS compliant or CDS standard, because we're using that same data capture for Ireland and Northern Ireland, and they are already in CDS territory. So we've actually got, for us to use CDS rather than Chief is pretty much not going to put any pressure on the trader, but it's also going to future-proof the trader without them having to do much. So hence the reason we want to go down that line. We're already looking at ICS2, which is the EU improvements to the ICS, which is the ENS, oh God, acronym territory, import control system, and the safety and security declaration. ICS2 phase 1 didn't impact any of us, but phase 2 will have an impact on the freight market, not in a big way, but it will do. So we're already sort of mapping out how that might look. We have a very scalable operation that's been key to us from day one, and even with sales saying to us, well, look, what's our upper limit? So, well, we don't have an upper limit because we've got more robots for one reason or another. As Gulab, our IT director, said, we've got more robots than NASA. I think we got a bit carried away with the robots. So we actually had a problem. One of the only problems we really had with the robots in terms of the robotic automation is them bumping into each other. So we had to, because they were all rushing around to do the same job. So we actually furloughed a couple of robots and everything sped up. So, and we also got, we've got our existing people, of which there are 96. And we're growing that. We're constantly recruiting. We've got our robotics, and we've also got our offshoring, which we're doing some work with some offshore. We're not going as far as India. We're not even going as far as the Philippines, which I've heard of quite a bit. We might end up in the Philippines, but at the moment we're looking at a halfway house for that and testing some of the data flows on that. So far, signs are really good. We're not trying to save money, I must admit. They're the same. I must make clear, rather, is that it's the cost is the same, but it's the ability to scale up quickly is really important to us. That's allowed us to get like this expert technical core, because we're going out looking at customs experts saying, how you like to join a customs agent? Okay, another one. Yeah, different here though. We don't want you to do any customs entries. We just want you to be there and be on call and help the ops teams and look at the routing. And we've always said that the customs entry is just a piece of it. One of the most important things is the sequencing of events. If you get the sequencing right, then the customs entry just is part of that sequence. The data management is key to us. We've got some real high skills within the organization that is looking at how we're going to use that data from source to destination and not merely pass it around, but here's the data for that bit, here's the data for that bit, but actually to have a single data flow where it's just enriched throughout its journey. And the final enrichment, if you like, is us adding the P&R codes and transmitting that through to customs to wrap up the import. But we shouldn't be receiving data and doing something with it. We should be adding to the data that's already in existence that is moving in parallel and concurrently to the movement of the freight. At least that's our concept, but it seems to be working. We've got significant investment in future customs, including the NASA robots. And also we are proud to say that we're also partnering DTS, the Digital Trader Service, along with Fujitsu and Institute of Export and HGS. And they have you might want to know actually that Institute of Export have a live webinar on the subject tomorrow about the new digital trader service. If you need a link to that, let us know and we'll pass that on to you. Just drop us an email. We'll certainly be there. So it's a good development and it creates more capacity in the market. Talking of the future, the near future is IPAFs, and that's got a lot of people, giving a lot of people sleepless nights, because we're talking about health certificates coming out of the EU and basically CHEDs or IPAFs entries coming into GB. We're not too phased with it, I must admit. We're not I think the hardest part is the exporter. In terms of the process into GB, not too onerous. We've been doing traces since day one. As I said, we managed to get the registration literally on Christmas Eve, so that we were able to do traces from day one. And actually, this graphic is showing you that not only could we do traces from day one, but I'm ridiculously proud of this, that we actually got #1 in Northern Ireland. It was the first CHED. Was done by us in Northern Ireland, and the first CHED was done by us in Southern Ireland. And as I say, I was a bit embarrassingly chuffed about that, so much so that when I look behind me, they are both framed on my wall. I'm that sad, really. That said, to get number one in Northern Ireland, now we're well, not even mid, we're early May. Since then, there have been 41,000 Ched Ps. Ched P, but Ched P is the most popular. It's the POAO stuff. But 41,000, but there'll always be a number one. And in the south, there have been 15,000, which only goes to show that a lot of the flow is going up over the top, but particularly of SPS goods. But there's 41,000 in the south, 41,000 in the north, 15,000 in the south, but we got number one in both of those markets, so we're super chuffed about that. So how does that make us think we can do IPAFs? Well, traces is harder than IPAFs. How can we say that? Well, because we've read the IPAFs literature and it looks easier than traces. Not so. We've done that for sure, but we've already been doing IPAFs for live animals, for live hatching chicks. And trust me, we did those absolutely spot on. And in fact, we monitored that job from beginning to end, because the fear was get that wrong and there's 35,000 hatching chicks which haven't made their destination. We had 2 or 3 people watching that truck at every movement. So we got some experience of live IPAFs already, and that was harder IPAFs, because if anything, they're trying to make life a bit easier. So what does it look like? What does the IPAF process look like? And of course, this will only interest you if you're in SPS territory, but there's a lot of people on this webinar that are. This flows from EU into GB particularly, this is what we're concentrating on here, but mostly flows into GB. So the trader is responsible for the import standards, not the exporter. You don't bring something in if it's not good enough to bring in. The PRFTL, the party responsible for the load, must be registered on IPAFs, and that's generally the consignee. You should all be registered. If not, do it. It's on Government Gateway. The exporter arranges the export health certificate. It's inspected by the OV, the vet. It's sealed at pallet level if need be, because of groupage and on milk round collections. And the seal number is put on the EHC. Important to note here that there was talk originally that you had to do the IPAFs in advance to get a number to give to the exporter that must then appear on the export health certificate. That's not the process anymore. That was nonsense. It needed to be more like the traces process, in that the export health certificate flows through the system and is added to the traces declaration, which is a notification. You can't be doing the traces before the health cert, and equally you can't be doing the IPAFs before the health cert. I know it was suggested that way, but it's pretty much changed. And that, I mean, that process, this is up to date. This is kind of moving feast at the moment, though. Sorry, and the pallet seal could be something like that, sort of, the normal sort of banding with a secure closure, so that the pallet, if you can't seal the truck, you can at least seal the pallets if you're doing multiple collections. And then the haulier would then apply the final commercial seal if he's got pallet seal level, and if not, the OV would if it was a full load or a collection, could still be a groupage, but if it's a collection from one location, then the OV can do the final seal. The export declaration is created, the IPAFs declaration is created, and the entry in declarants records import in GB is created or scheduled. IPAFs and EIDR still work together. Be very careful here that we don't get confused between controlled goods and goods with controls. Goods with controls are products of animal origin, blimey, CITES, blah, 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 blah. The controlled goods are rough cut diamonds, nuclear waste, military equipment. So there is a subtle difference, but and this is why you need a customs intermediary who knows that stuff. I'm not saying we've got the exclusive right to that, but it just shows the value of a customs intermediary that knows the difference between controlled goods and goods with control. There's a subtle difference. Anyway, here once the export health certificate. This is an EU import in reverse, really. There is an export health certificate, then there is an export declaration, an IPAFs to say it's coming, an entry in declarants records, or even a port entry if you're so minded. The GB authority will check the paperwork, particularly in the first, from October onwards, and from January onwards, there may be a physical check may be required, and once that's done, the location to be defined, but maybe one of the IBFs, the inland border facilities. Once that's done, the goods can be delivered, and wait for it, and everybody's happy, and everything's moved on. So it's not as good as today, but it's not a showstopper if you get it right. The export health certificate is the showstopper. That's the hardest piece in all of this, is somebody who's not been doing export health certificates suddenly having to do export health certificates for basically a couple of small quantities in some cases, and that can become prohibitive. Personally, I think we'll end up at the attestation stage, so that the export, as the EU have done with composite goods, this new change in April where composite goods require a health certificate, or certain levels of them can be done with an attestation. I think we're going to end up with attestations here, but nobody wants to say it out loud, because what the UK wants to do is mirror the European policy. And if European policy is asking for export health certificate and traces, then UK is going to ask for export health certificate and IPAFs. It's a staring match to a degree, I think, anyway, but that's my personal opinion. But it starts in October. We've already got the robotics working on it to see if we can make that a bit slicker. And there's no reason why we can't do that, but just be aware. Northern Ireland, let's touch on Northern Ireland quickly. The process is actually quite simple. It's unfettered access and so on and so forth, but people are getting quite sort of hung up on it, but it's actually not as bad as it sounds. Is that if you, the process is dust, there are what, 5 steps there. So if you've got a movement from GB to NI, and I'm only going to focus on GB to NI at the moment, and not even transits at the moment, although transits, we've started to open up through TSS now, we've started to open up the flow of transits from GB to NI via Republic of Ireland. That's been done with the help of a band of authorised consignees, if you like, and the help of ping handling in Belfast International Airport, who have allowed us to work within their approvals, and big thank you to Ping for that. But anyway, this is the process for GB direct to NI. So the carrier or the trader completes the TSS portal, which creates the initial record. That record with some additional data fields that have been added to it other than just the ENS fields that will create the safety and security declaration into NI, but it will also create an SFD for controlled goods. And this is what I mean with controlled goods. So goods with controls are products of animal origin, organics, restricted, waste, weapons, excise and drugs. It's not the same as controlled goods. These are, in fact, the word is slightly wrong here. These are goods with controls, not the same as GB imports controlled goods. Anyway, the system, if it's one of those type of products, it will ask for additional information again, and that will create a simplified frontier declaration so that the goods can be monitored at the frontier in terms of customs risk profiling. And if not, it's an entry in declarants records. Eventually, everything will be on SFD, but it will be pretty invisible to the trader, who will just be completing the portal, and the sort of back office will be doing all the hard work digitally, I have to say. That then creates MRNs, and the haulier is then given the ENS MRN, the Safety and Security Declaration MRN, and the MRN number for the Simplified Frontier Declaration, or the EORI number for the entry in declarants records. They put that on GBMS, and then they cross into, and then they cross into Northern Ireland, and then a supplementary declaration is required to close the job off and account for any duty if there is any. That first part takes place normally in the space of about 24 hours from start to end, sometimes even quicker. And the last part can be up to a month, because it's basically CFSP without the deferred entry scheme. But I want to home in on the subdeck piece. There are 2 versions really of a subdeck. It depends on whether the goods are going into Northern Ireland or going eventually into the Republic of Ireland. So if the goods are going into Northern Ireland, they're deemed to be not at risk. In order to declare goods not at risk, the importer must be registered on the UK Trader Scheme. If you're not already registered on the UK Trader Scheme, get on and do it immediately. There is some text in there that says that you need to have a legal entity in Northern Ireland or an indirect representative. The Trader Support Service acts as your indirect representative, at least for the time being, and therefore you qualify for the UK Trader Scheme, even though you've not got a legal entity in NI. Get on and do it. You won't. There's no reason. There's no cost to it. But you can't declare the goods not at risk if you're not on it. There's no duty on GB origin goods or UK free circulation goods, because they're still in the UK. Northern Ireland is this unique, fantastic opportunity, I have to say, where depending on who it's dealing with, it has a couple of hats. So if it's dealing with GB, then it's in the UK, and if it's dealing with the EU, then it's in the EU. So it's a unique situation. It's going to take some time to find its feet, but when it does, it's a real opportunity for a dual territory territory, really. I don't think that's been done anywhere else in the world, where it's a case of, you ask Northern Ireland a question, and before they can give you the answer, they're asking who's asking, because the answer is different. Now, it will take time, but the investment, there's a lot of investment starting to look at Northern Ireland now, because you can be in two customs territories at the same time. If the goods are not at risk, you use the UK global tariff, which is the one we're all familiar with. If we go on trade tariff, that's the one we end up with. And that's the one with 16,000 commodity codes and kind of chief level codings. If the goods are at risk, which means they are potentially destined for the Republic of Ireland, then there is duty if they're not GB origin. UK free circulation doesn't count for anything in this situation. An at-risk import in Northern Ireland is exactly the same as an import entry in the Republic of Ireland. It's just the process is slightly different, but the concept is exactly the same. Say that again. An at-risk entry into Northern Ireland is the same as an import entry into the Republic of Ireland. Exactly the same methodology. So if it's not GB origin, it's dutiable. You can claim return goods relief if it's EU origin, exactly as you would with an IE import. It's the same thing. It's just done slightly differently. The tariff that it's used is the XI tariff, which is very similar to TARIC, which is the European version. And this is one of the reasons why CDS was used in Northern Ireland, because it's capable of handling dual tariffs. Within the consignment, you can have a bit of both. So there might be 20 cartons are definitely for Northern Ireland, but the other 20 cases might not be. And therefore, you might have to split them within the declaration. But just bear in mind, you can't declare goods not at risk unless you're qualified to do that by applying for the UK Trader Scheme. So that's Ireland in 2 slides. Let's look at stats. Let's just see. This is one of the things when I worked for Eurotunnel years ago. We used to go and visit logistics companies all the time. They loved seeing you, not because you were putting prices up, or they were trying to beat you to get the prices down, but they loved seeing you because they got the context of their operation in the market. Quite so often I was asked by hauliers saying, well, look, what's he doing? What's he doing? And I would never quote individual carriers, but they wanted to know what the market was doing, because if you're not moving on an escalator which is going up, then you're going backwards, because you're having to go backwards to stay exactly where you are in a market which is growing. So it's important to always keep the concept of the market or the context of the market in order to know how your performance is faring. So let's look at statistics. I throw this up here just because let's just keep sensible here. 99% of the adult population have more than the average number of legs. What I'm saying here is that you can make figures say pretty much everything, and a mixture of percentages and averages always has a nice effect. Clearly that statement is a bit crackers, but it's actually really true, because nobody has 3 legs. Some people unfortunately have less than 2, maybe 1 or none, and therefore the average is less than 2. And therefore 99% of the population have more than the average number of legs. My point being, read trade stats carefully. Don't just take them at face value. Here's another good example. In December, this teddy bear made in China would have shipped into the EU as a larger consignment of teddy bears and been cleared into free circulation in the EU and distributed to the end customers in UK, Germany and France, for example. That's what happened pre-Brexit. So that was recorded in the UK as a movement from the EU. Post-Brexit, in order to avoid double duty jeopardy by paying duty in the EU but not actually affecting the origin of the product, those goods are now not cleared in the EU, but they're entered into transit if the destination is known. By the way, if you don't know that you've got a customer in the UK, you could end up with double duty jeopardy. But if this is a scenario where 1,000 of those teddy bears were actually destined for the UK, then you wouldn't clear them on arrival at Rotterdam, for example. You would put them into bond, on a T1 transit and they would arrive in the UK as a Chinese import. So on the 31st of December, that was an intra-EU trade. On the 1st of January, that's a Chinese import, which has the effect of increasing the imports from China and reducing the imports from the EU. But the teddy bear hasn't changed, neither's the flow of the goods. So what's important to remember here, whenever you're looking at trade stats, is that the fiscal movement is not necessarily the physical movement of goods. And what's happened here is the physical movement of goods hasn't changed at all, but the fiscal movement has. And what started life as an intra-EU movement is now an import from China. That said, let's throw some stats up. These are from the Office for National Statistics. Say that an hour and a half, 45 minutes in. It clearly shows on the left-hand side that the imports, goods imports from the EU has slumped. I don't see any reason why it would actually, apart from there was stockpiling and so on and so forth. But also bear in mind that a lot of the entries, a lot of the declarations are on the 6 months deferred. There's also a lot of data missing. So this is why I'm saying, like, read all of these with a pinch of salt. Nice colours, nice graphics. Can't really do anything with it till you've got about 6 months of it. And equally, you're not comparing imports with imports. Similarly with exports, there's a huge dip in exports, probably because half the declarations weren't done, the goods were just exported. And if there is no declaration, there's no control. This is years ago when we were doing customs declarations. It was only, this was pre-93 when it all kind of stopped in the EU. It was quite obvious you were sitting there just doing trade stats, really. You were doing VAT accounting and trade stats. There was hardly any duty on anything. This is what we're doing now. We're doing VAT accounting and trade stats. So back to the future, really. So read them with a pinch of salt. More importantly, get yourself on the website. I was surprised how good this website is. It's certainly come up a notch. So the Office for National Statistics website with trade stats is really good. Give it time to mature so that you are comparing apples with apples, but it is really good data. And I've shown here the graphic where I've just sort of highlighted India, and it's given me immediately the balanced trade between imports and exports and categorized and trends in certain sort of static categories. But that arrow can go anywhere. That's an interactive map, and the data is instantly delivered to you. So it's a good market to go to. It's a good resource to go to, because honestly, it's come on leaps and bounds from what it used to look like. So if you're not visited it, make sure you visit it. Now let's do the barometer piece. What do trucks look like? What do trucks and ferries look like? This for me is always a bit more real time. So when you look at Route 1, which is the central corridor, the sort of Holyhead Dublin route, year to date to March 21, it's down 31% on the same period last year. It's actually improving. It's still down, but it's not as down as it was, if that's an expression. NI flows into Cairnryan Larne, Cairnryan Belfast, for example, are actually up 7% compared to the same period last year. Now, all that tells you is what anybody in the business knows, that logistics always finds the path of least resistance, and flows into from GB to NI are the path of least resistance, which, to be fair, as a partner in the Trader Support Service, is exactly what we set out to achieve, was to try and get halfway between, or to try and match together rather, UCC compliance and unfettered access. And the proof of the pudding really seems to be in the stats. Moving down to the probably more popular, if you like, well, definitely more popular in terms of numbers, is the short straits, the sort of Dover-Calais Eurotunnel. They're down, not surprisingly down. The one that surprises me slightly is that the ferries aren't as down as they're saying they are. Sorry, that the ferries are down, but not as much as I think they are. They're saying it's slightly less. So the ferries are saying they're down 12%. P&O are saying they're down more like the Eurotunnel figure, but DFDS are pretty bullish about their figures and are actually saying they're quite good. It doesn't really, I don't know if that computes, because if there's 3 players in the market and 2 of them are suffering and one of them isn't, then there's a reason for that. It's either one of them's got a really low rates or one of them's not quite been as genuine with the figures as the other one. Not accusing anybody, but it just doesn't seem to quite ring true in terms of the stats. Overall, though, the ferries are down 12% and Eurotunnel is down 21%. Eurotunnel certainly seems to be the favoured route for SPS. which because it's a bit more on site. One of the benefits of Eurotunnel always has been is that not only are they the transit provider, they're also the terminal operator, so they've always had end-to-end coverage, and that seems to work pretty well. Western Channel was down 25%, not surprised with that. Why are they down? And again, I say all of these are available, all of these slides are available after the event. They're down because of new routes, but that's only going to have a minimal impact. So there's the sort of Dunkirk Rosslare route, which DFDS have put on. That's not included in these figures here. But one of the ways to avoid Brexit is not go through the land bridge and actually just scoot yourself around the country that's left the EU. So certainly those routes and those different modes are really picking up. We've seen quite a bit of intermodal from Italy coming straight up to Ireland, for example. Certainly people have been a bit more imaginative, but that's logistics for you. That's what we do, problem solvers. That's the nature of the beast. There's also the effect, of course, on figures when you're comparing to last year is a bit of a COVID effect. COVID lockdown only started in March last year, I think, wasn't it? Or have I missed a year somewhere? It's hard to tell nowadays. There was also stockpiling, of course. Everyone was fearful of Brexit, so they put a ridiculous amount of stock in hold and then realised they didn't need it. And then, of course, there's Brexit themselves. So, but from our side, do check us out. The website's really strong. And whether or not you're looking to book an appointment with one of the experts, which is free of charge, you just log on and book it. Whether you're looking at the RPA and how the data flows work, that's a free download on the website, or whether you just require a customs declaration, be that a Frontier Deck, a simplified Frontier Deck, or an entry in Declarants Records, it's all on the website. It's all available. We update it regularly. We actually run the website in-house because we want to be able to change things really fast. And we always feel that if we put it out to the open market, we can't control it enough. And really, as a sort of as a closing piece, really, is do take us up on this offer. Is it's much calmer here. Remember the classical music playing in the background? It genuinely is. It's a calmer environment because we've sort of turned everything back on itself, and the live ops concentrate on the live ops, and we just play people in the right positions. Of course, January and February, everyone was just basically chasing the ball around the pitch, and then we realised that well, anybody would realise that you couldn't do that indefinitely, and we just play people in the right positions, and the whole thing calms down. And as my dad used to say, let the ball do the work. Okay? So what we're offering is that if you want some expert advice, just log on to our website and book a slot with one of the experts. You don't actually pick them by name, but we'll profile the expert that is best suited for you based on the questions that we're asking you. There's not a million questions, it's just a half a screen, but we want to know things like what kind of industry sector you're in, what kind of volumes are you looking at, just so that we get the right person to pitch in, and then we ask you what you're worried about, what things are giving you concerns. Is it rules of origin? Is it bonded warehousing? Do you want to have a look at setting up an ETSF or whatever it is? Then we'll put the right person in touch with you. That allows us to do the bit of the job that we enjoy the most, which is the process and data mapping. We love mapping out supply chains and seeing where the data points are and how we can enrich those data points and what that process looks like. We love doing that. And what's the result is we end up doing what we do for a living, but that's as a result of us doing all the detailed mapping at the front end. We've got rules of origin expertise in-house, dedicated rules of origin expertise, so make use of that. The lovely Eava looks after that for us. Not that everyone else isn't lovely, but I'm just saying, the lovely Eava. She's brilliant. I mean, it was Eava who kind of woke me up to the GSP flows when we were looking at it, thinking, look, when you do this job for a long time, there's certain things you read or you look at, you think, well, that just doesn't ring true. And it was a good conversation with Eava and our ops team that we actually got to the bottom of it. Some of the stuff Eava tells me just blows my brains, but it's very techie, and what we're very good is dragging that down into practical, on the ground experience and expertise. Really, it's free. This consultation is free. Whether it takes, depending on who you are, it might take an hour, it might take 2 hours. Can't take 3 weeks. Not for free. We'll have nothing left. But if there is any funding that's required, if we think we're going to incur some fees, then we can apply for funding through the SME Support Fund, which is up to £2,000, which normally covers everything we do. Because what we're trying to do is we're not trying to take consultancy revenue from you, but we're trying to set you up so that you can handle the imports in the most efficient way, and hopefully we can look after that for you for a competitive price. It's your choice, but you just want to pitch yourselves up, make it hard for you not to. That's we've got 4 minutes, so I'm going to do Incoterms, even though I said we'll try and cram it in. I can't believe how quickly this 2 hours have gone. I hope they've gone as quickly for you as they have for me. If not, I really apologise. This is on record, so you can watch it again and again and again, and bring your friends around and have a dinner party. Let's talk about Incoterms quickly, because it's quite punchy, this. DDP, delivered duty paid. We don't like it. The reason why we don't like it is that the sender needs to be the importer, because delivered duty paid means you're responsible for duties and taxes at destination, which therefore means you need to be registered for duties and taxes at destination, which means you need to be an importer, which means you need a VAT number, for example, in the UK, and your agent needs to act for you on an indirect basis, because you're not legally established in the UK, unless of course you are legally established in the UK. So we don't like that one. Equally, we don't like XWorks. XWorks is the same, but in reverse. So the problem with XWorks is that the exporter is not the exporter. He's just selling stuff to an importer on the basis of selling stuff. And the fact that that importer has got an English accent doesn't make it VAT free. So technically under XWorks, the buyer has to have VAT registration in the country of purchase in order that they can handle the purchase tax or the VAT. Okay? So we don't like that one either. The clear front runners are FCA and DAP, or the equivalents. So you've got free carrier or delivered at place, because it allows everybody to play in their position from a customs point of view. I knew that screen would come back. HubSpot's chasing me. Sorry. I'm not even sure if that appears on the screen, but let's assume it does, and it's quite out of the way. So FCA and DAP are the clear favourites, because it allows people to play in their positions. So the exporter is the exporter, and the importer is the importer, and is responsible for the import declaration, the import duty, and the import VAT. Nice and clean and crisp. The only difference between FCA and DAP is in an FCA environment, the importer is paying the freight as well, and in a DAP, the sender is paying the freight. But otherwise, it's nice and simple. They're playing in their positions. Let's have a very quick look at DDP exports, which has caught a lot of GB exporters out. That if you have exports from GB, there is a tendency, because your customer didn't vote for Brexit, and maybe you didn't, but the nation did. I could argue that one all day long, but let's say they did. Okay, then you're going to have a situation where you want to maintain your export, and you want to do that in the softest way possible. So you say, do you know what, we'll sort everything out, you just continue to buy our stuff, right? And then you end up in DDP territory, which is potentially quite dangerous, because a DDP export from GB to France requires VAT registration in France. Also in Italy, requires VAT registration in Italy, and a transit document to get there. And in Germany, requires VAT registration in Germany and a transit document to get there. And that's just 3. There were 27 of those, if you include Ireland. And there's no reason why you shouldn't. It's in the EU. It's complicated. It's not as easy as it looks. There is a simpler way, which is called fiscal representation. Now, with fiscal representation, you take the common touch point, which might be France, for example, and you get VAT registration in France. So now everything is consigned to your French VAT registration, which is on postponed accounting, by the way, and then you onward supply from that French VAT registration to Italy. That's now France to Italy, no VAT, reverse charge, or France to Germany, no VAT, reverse charge. Interestingly, France to France is domestic reverse charge, and therefore there's no VAT on it either. We have a web page for this. It's called Fiscal Rep. If you need any help in that, we've got some very good partners that help us set this up, and we can normally do it pretty quickly, and it's not as expensive as it looks. I mean, there's some cases about 250 quid. So to suddenly get this DDP registration. So keep in touch on that one. And we've nailed it. We are bang on. This is the last slide. I didn't know if I could talk for 2 hours, but I've enjoyed every minute of it. And this is the last slide. Just to reiterate that, get on our website, click on the link for which is under webinar at the moment, but the webinar piece will soon disappear, and it will just be Meet the Experts. Click on that, fill in the form, and then our schedulers will be in touch to agree a mutually beneficial time. This is infinitely possible now that we're all on Teams and on digital connections. Would have been an absolute nightmare if we were trying to travel the country, because it never pans out the right way. But do go on there. It's, as I say, it's free of charge. Let us have a look. Even if you think you're in the right space, let us have a look and tell you whether we think you're in the right space. And if you think it's just a sense check. The other thing, that question I've just added at the bottom, is we used to do a lot of these in the build up to Brexit. January, February, March we were too busy. And now, as I said, everything's calmed down a bit. We're back in the game. Should we do more of these? Has this been useful? I mean, I'm not asked for sort of survey feedback, but drop us a line on one of the email addresses we've got, even if it's webinar@eori.uk. And if you think we should do these probably maybe once a month, once every 2 months, and we'll happily accept questions for what you need covered, then let's do it. This information changes quickly, and it's important to talk to the people that do it on a day-to-day basis. So if you think you would benefit, let us know. Otherwise, thank you for attending. I hope it's been useful for you, and keep in touch. Thank you very much.